Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. The heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio!
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new dispositions. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Welcome, everyone, to another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher, speaker, and author Gary Wayne. This is your host, Lisa George. We've received a bunch of questions during last month's show that Gary will be answering today. And if you do have a question for Gary, please join the live chat on YouTube and put it in all caps so that we can see them. My niece, Rihanna, is in the chat, and she will be helping me again today to retrieve the questions so that we don't miss any. Thank you so much for all your help, and for our moderators are awesome. I believe Zen is also in the chat, so we look forward to a great fellowship and just a wonderful time today. And thank you, everyone, for participating. And Brother Gary, how are you doing? And please share any updates and contact information with our listeners. Are you there, brother?
I am doing very fine and happy to have you back working with us. Hopefully your vacation was good. And yes, I do have an update for book 2 on audio. And for people who aren't aware, book 1 came out a couple months ago and is doing quite well on Amazon ACX, which is delivered to Amazon Audible. So if you just click on Genesis 6 Conspiracy, you're going to see the Kindle, the printed, and the Audible version. And book 2, the narrator has been working feverishly since he's been recovering from his near-death experience and has it completed. I'm waiting to get the sound drafts myself so I can start reviewing it. And we're hoping to turn it around and have it approved within the next 2 to 3 weeks and out before Christmas. And so that will be through Amazon ACX as well, so available on iTunes and Audible, and then I'll update my website that will have a link, just as I have a link up there for each of the Kindle versions for book 1 or book 2. They'll have an Audible link to take you right to where you can purchase it.
All right. Oh, it's so exciting. You have a lot going on there, Gary. My goodness. And yes, thank you for acknowledging my vacation. It was a wonderful experience. I'm not sure if, I can't remember if I mentioned to you where we were going, but we went to the Philippines and to a conference there, and we went to Japan on the way back. And so just a wonderful time of fellowship. And I actually brought a copy of your book. I don't know if you're aware of the God Culture Ministry on YouTube, and they have a website with Tim and Anna Schwab, but they're fans of yours. They follow your work. They read volume 1, so I brought them a copy of volume 2. So we were all reading.
Thank you for doing that.
Oh, of course. I love to promote your work because it's such high quality. And then, like you mentioned earlier, there's so many different ways to access it. I mean, there's audio. You've got I mean, your work is just always just like, you can always verify everything you write about. You always, I tell everybody this is like my spiel for you, but I really appreciate you coming on and to have this Ask Me Anything monthly. And yes, I did miss last month because we were gone, but yes, I'm back. And I wanted to just acknowledge everyone in the chat. They always keep it so friendly. And don't forget, you guys, if you have questions for Gary, please, as I said earlier, put them in all caps in the chat. My niece is in there helping out to make sure we get everyone's questions. But we do have a list from last time, and I had some questions actually sent to me on Facebook Messenger as well, because we were running a little bit short. But everyone, like especially the person who asked the majority of the questions on the list today, he said he has like a never-ending list of questions for you, Gary. So.
Yes, Daniel does. He's like that. But,
oh my goodness.
But he asks very good questions, particularly as it pertains to prophecy, and it gets to, very important understandings of how the end time chronology works, and that's what I like about the questions is that just everything helps to just reinforce that there is a chronology that you can use and everything fits. And if you understand that, then people will be able to dig out information like what I dig out for those questions.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And your resource list is just amazing. I am actually still working on your book, but I'm finally in the last section, the prophetic section. And I actually have a couple questions for you too, but I'll get into those later. But my goodness, I am just so impressed with your research as usual, and have been sharing it with my husband Noble, and it leads to other rabbit trails we continue to go down. And it's a great way to learn and just learn about the entire scope. And you use so many great resources that you can easily go to and look up. So I really appreciate it.
And the resources that I use in book 2 for people, I mean, just having the bibliography is important, because those are Christian sources, because it's a heavily weighted Christian book, just some outside references used to sort of make a point or something like that. But these are important resources for, I think, Christians to have. And one of the things I also do that, I had to do the hard way is to be able to compare different translations of verses. And if people aren't aware of that one, I mean, I don't generally use it, for a book reference, but I'll do it quickly when I need to see several translations, is just put in a Bible verse, Google Bible Hub, and it'll put up probably 15 or 20 translations into English, and you can look at all of the comparatives to get a quick understanding of that passage.
Wow, what was that again? Google Bible Hub? I've never heard of that.
BibleHub. Okay. Bring it up and put the verse on it. And once you're on there, you can just punch in a verse and go anywhere you want. It'll pop those ones up. So.
Oh, that's great. Things have gotten so much easier to research now in these days of where knowledge will increase. And I think we're seeing that through the use of the internet and just so many more things you can access. And it's just amazing times.
Yeah, and one of the things I really liked using Ellicott's commentary is one that I liked because it gave an 18th century opinion on things in terms of its editorials. But Strong's Cyclopedia, that is a set of volumes of books that is unlike anything out there. And what people don't know is most of the Bible dictionaries use that for their main sourcing. And it works perfectly with the Strong's dictionary with more information.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm taking some notes here. Thank you very much, Gary. And we just had a monumental event happen yesterday. I don't know if you want to comment on any of that or not really. Speaking
Well,
of the
it
kings
is.
and rulers of the earth that I'm reading about in your chapters.
It is. And I've been telling people as I speak to them on shows or at conferences that, we can push things back so that there's not this sort of big march that's getting ever faster and into ever more persecution and things like that. And that happens at an election. And I know a lot of Christians don't participate in the elections. I think that they should, because even if you're saying that both are evil, one is likely going to be more evil than the other. And if you can have less evil in the world by your influence, I think you should exercise that. But that's just my opinion. I get that they're still running a government of the world, but we can still participate and we can still influence. And with the spirit in us, we need to make fruit out of our spirit that is saving us, and to role model people. And I think we can role model in that theater as well. So all theaters are welcome for Christians to go in to try and influence and to bring people to God. So yeah, the result is one of those things that I think is going to slow things down with the march, which is good, because what's coming is horrible. I know the outcome is good, but I don't think anybody should want to go through the last 7 years or the last 10 years. And I think it's a powerful thing. Now, we'll see what happens between now and inauguration. There could be, other attempts on the life and ongoing attempts on his life. And we need to judge him objectively, and that he uphold the things that he said. And we need to criticize him when he does not uphold those things. But if he can make life better for Christians and better for people as a whole, we should support that.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'm one of those people that you talked about at the beginning. I'm just really not political. But I did have a friend. I wanted to get your comment on this real quick before I go into the questions, while we're on this topic of what happened yesterday. He sent me this information. I don't know if you've ever heard of Aleister Crowley's book called The Moonchild.
I have heard it. I have not read it. So,
okay. Yeah. I haven't read it either, but I did do some research after he was pointing out some of these things. It was written in, I think, 1923. And then, of course, I immediately think of the reference to the Moonchild in the book of Og of Bashan, which I think you said that you've read, correct, Gary?
Yes, I have, and that's a very accurate reference to kind of what he's getting at.
Yeah, okay. And so then Albert Pike, he's had this quote from Albert Pike, who's saying the right and the left is our creation, kind of in quotes. Okay, and I think you can reference that as well.
Yep, cattle herding everybody into the direction they want us to go. So that's why a grassroots movement is always preferable, because it at least temporarily displaces the organizational structure of the globalists and the polytheists.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that too. So anyway, apparently around the time that this book was written in 1923 by Crowley, he was kind of buddies, from my research too, with like Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons. They were like the scientism type of sect and whatever, and they were communicating. So there is actually a letter from Crowley to one of those guys, and talking about how he believed that the two of them, or one of them, had figured out a way to conceive an actual moon child, whatever that would mean. Are you aware of the letter or anything like to do with that?
No, but typically the moon child is an Antichrist allegorical figure, and he also Crowley also considered himself an avatara of Horus. As a moon child, as the offspring of Isis and Osiris. And so part of the Masonic Trinity as the allegory with using post-Diluvian gods is the son Horus, the mother goddess, and Holy Spirit in their belief system, Isis, and the patriarchal El Elyon, which would be Osiris. And they look at those as an allegory for Satan, and then the two associated with Satan, which would imply a female consort and a son.
Yes, exactly. Kind of like the Jesuit, I guess, Catholic depiction of what they say is Mary and Jesus, right? But we know otherwise they use Semiramis, Nimrod, that situation, right? Okay, so the next point that my friend made here, using that information, I guess a little summary of the book, The Moonchild, is it's kind of like a magical war between light and dark wizards, and they're trying to produce this Moonchild as like a magician, and but all the other things, like you just said, Gary, the different references to what that Moonchild would actually be. And just because these guys, I guess around this time, were trying to reenact that whole thing with the Moonchild being born, and that would be like the Antichrist figure, like you said. They were looking for like a particular blood moon that would actually be eclipsed from certain places on Earth. And I need to do more research on this, but I wanted to get your thoughts. So on June 14th in 1946, there was a blood moon that was documented, and it was totally eclipsed over Egypt. And so that particular day, 6/14/46, is also the birthday of our president. So I just thought that those connections were interesting. I'm not saying that is
and 3 6s in there with June, the 6th month. It was June 14th. I thought it was June 6th. Sorry. So that wouldn't be correct. But typically that'll have a very important date in terms of the occult and the astrology that goes with it. So they also believe there's antichrists that are born in every generation, and in the West they keep 3 of them available all of the time because they're always looking for that opportunity. So it's an ongoing sort of thing. But do expect that according to occult beliefs and occult astrology, as it's told in the stars or the fallen angels that control the fates of humankind, they'll have an astrological arrangement, and that's associated as an interpretation of an astronomical event that will bring about the birth date of the Antichrist to help create his mythos. But also expect that there will be probably something like a star associated with it as well as the moon. The moon is the mother goddess, and the starfire is the nectar of the moon goddess, and it's the blood that enhances and provides super life to people, and that's why they want to drink the royal star fire, so to speak. And so the genes of the royal bloodlines, the genes of the Antichrist bloodline is passed down through dynasties and through new dynasties and through specific genes of the matriarch. And so the mother goddess aspect is sort of a reflection of that. And one deduces that who is talked about regularly would be Lucifer, or Satan, as we would know him from the KJV Bible, would be the other counterpart that's involved somehow, some way with the creation of the Antichrist.
Very interesting. Thank you. And that's the Sangreal, is that correct?
Yeah, well, from the Descendants' perspective, it's the Sangreal or the Sangreal as opposed to the Sangral. I know that sounds like a lot of interesting little minutiae in terms of the different words. The Sangral is the chalice, the ancient Sumerian goblet. Sangreal is holy blood, and Sangreal is royal blood in a different sort of understanding. So, but all meaning and pointing in the same direction, because the Grail is the matriarchal bloodline of the Antichrist that's talked about in the Holy Grail, that comes down through Mary Magdalene in their belief system, and Jesus, but specifically as they pump up the allegory is with the House of Del Axe, or Mary, Mares being the word for sea in Latin and other languages, and a whole bunch of other allegories that will go in it. So those genealogies, are encoded into it, and that bloodline passes on according to that belief system to Aragon, of the Camelot dynasties, who's going to marry into the Merovingian dynasties with Amenabad, which creates a new ennobled dynasty, which sets the Merovingians on to that scioning into their other scion bloodlines, like the Quinatar, which goes back to Lord Maitreya. Which is Mitra or Mithra of Mithraism and the god of Zoroastrianism. And the Indo-Aryan language there is the language of the giants. So that's why it's important to it's important to get back to Hebrew and Greek, but also if we can get back to the Indo-Aryan of it, it really sort of lights things up.
Yeah, and I just read about, I was reading it to Noble earlier, my husband, about the Scion bloodlines that you mentioned in your book, and how it helped me understand what that means, that they, of course, Satan twists everything and put the S there instead of a Z, and his holy mountain, of course, Mount Hermon. And so when you say the Scion bloodline, Scion is another name for, like Mount Sion is another name for Mount Hermon, and of course that's with the S, correct?
Yes, two different spellings, but conflated. So when you see like the Priory of Sion, it's not necessarily referring in its original sense to a priory on the rock on the mountain of Israel in Jerusalem, but it's referring to the oath-based system and the harem anathema at the holy accursed mountain Haram, or Hermon, as we understand it in English, where they instituted the oath-based system and swore an oath to carry it out to the end. So the Priory of Sion, they have the kings of Jerusalem that have these bloodlines of the Merovingians, and is the bloodlines of the Anjou for the Antichrist. They would like to present them. It's currently held by King Philippe Bourbon. I won't go through how he inherited it, but understand it's through these intermarriages all the way down through history. And that this is an acknowledgement of their, the most holiest of their temples that they would like to have at Mount Hermon, like the Pan Temple, for example, where the gateway to Hades are, that Baal would go back and forth through. So they use that as a double entendre. So when they're talking about Sion, even though it's a French transliteration of Zion, they're actually using that as a rouge to reference Mount Hermon, which is their holy mountain.
Yes.
And where the Council of Gods is located.
Yes, exactly. Oh, thank you so much for that, Gary. And that leads us into, we better get into the questions. Leads us into the first question from John Paul Yaunis. And he asks, my dad is a Holy Royal Arch degree in the York Rite. What can you tell me about Masons of this degree?
Run that by me one more time on the.
Oh, sure. Okay. He says, my dad is a Holy Royal Arch degree in the York Rite. What can you tell me about Masons of this degree?
Okay, what I would understand from that terminology is the York degree is the old system versus the Scottish Rite, which is the 33rd degree for first level of adept. York is a third degree. Typically, arch masons are at least at the third degree, maybe even the fifth degree. And because he's just saying Freemasonry, I'm not going to put him any higher than that. But I would conclude that he is at least third degree, could be fourth, could be fifth. Fifth degree in the York would be like what we would understand in layman's terms as a regional manager. So he would oversee multiple lodges versus being just the head of one lodge. And so, yeah, it's the old system that I think we should pay a little bit more attention to, because the modern one is kind of done, and it's kind of a bit of misinformation. So I think there's probably likely as many as 33 degrees in the York Rite. Maybe there's more. I've been told there's as many as 100 degrees in the system, but usually when people are talking about 100 degrees, they're using the Scottish Rite system. So I would think that would be 33rd degree would be close to 100 degrees in or 99 degrees in the Scottish Rite. So when we're talking about the royales being initiated from childhood, so when you see images of King James being initiated in Scotland, and they have this on stained glass windows in some churches in England, he was so far above that. That's just for ceremony, and that's just for public consumption. As a royale, they are 3rd degree or 33rd degree adept before they're even an adult. They're way above that. They just can't take the adept title as a royale until they're somewhere between 25 and 30 years old, from what I'm told. And so they will call themselves a 32nd degree adept. So a 32nd degree in the Scottish Rite is not an adept yet. They're still mundane. But in New York Rite, they're very close to the top, just waiting for that capstone, so to speak, in terms of their Masonic imagery to become the ultimate sort of level. And typically that's a royale of a very high bloodline if they're going to call themselves a 32nd degree, waiting to be an adult to get that adept part. But that's part of all of the purebloods.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Gary. Next question from Kevin Ogle. Who was the Nephilim tribe that infiltrated the Levitical priesthood after Babylonian captivity and changed the name to Pharisee?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're the ones who have the sect changed to Pharisees or to Sadducees. I think that's a little bit older. But I think who is being referred to would be the Nephilim. And they are a bloodline of temple servants that show up in the Second Temple. And they're taken back as survivors coming back from Babylon, and their bloodline is shown in the time of the First Temple in Solomon. And these temple servants tend to be the tribe of the Hivim that's talked about in the book of Joshua, and specifically as they're also known as Gibeonites, or as I would call them, Gibeonim, and the ones who negotiate a treaty with Joshua. And so they become, God's going to honor the treaty. Joshua has been deceived, but there's, a deal is a deal, and it's done with the authority of God. So they're going to have that treaty, but they're going to become temple servants, woodcutters, and whatever else. One presumes that may even at some point include the scribes. Now, in the Old Testament, you also get the Kenites that are part of the scribes as well, that more people might associate with the Pharisees. And the Kenites can be one of two different people. They can be descendants of Kenaz, that shows up in Genesis 36, or they might actually be the Kenim, which are actually giants that are part of the triple K in Genesis 15, where you have the Cadmonim, you have the Kenazim, and you have the Kenim. And the Kenites are the ones whose name goes back to Cain in its meaning. And so that would be the other option that you might utilize to say that. But these could be just the descendants of Kenaz, or they could be part of the Kenites that are part of the hybrid branches in Genesis 36 as well. So it's you want to be careful with that one in terms of which people that are being talked about as being servants and scribes. One is quite clear to me. The other one is it's a possibility, or there could be just people that are associated with the people of Jethro. So again, want to be careful with that.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much, Gary. There's another question from Kevin Ogle. He's asking, what is the connection between the Book of Jude and the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I'm not sure quite what Kevin might be asking on that. So one thing, I'll talk a little bit about the Book of Jude and maybe show why it's an important passage for the Catholics. So this is a book that is not considered apocrypha, but the definition is akin to apocrypha. And what we mean by apocrypha is where they can't nail down the author, or they would have an original Hebrew or Greek manuscript, depending on when the dating of when it would be set down. So this is something that is called in the Catholic Church something called entelegomena, and it means disputed as whether or not it should be part of the canon or not. But they put it in. So it's just that it's not a set belief that there's people who would say, hey, maybe it shouldn't be in there because we're not sure it's verified enough. So who Jude is he's the brother of Jesus, as talked about in Jude 1:1 and also in Matthew and Mark, Matthew 13 and Mark 6. And so he's also a brother of James the Just, who's the first bishop of Jerusalem. So this is an important individual that they're taking him back to. And as a brother, we would sort of look at it as half-brother, because his father would be Joseph, Mary being the participating parent for all of them. So this is the Despacini, and they have a very, very important place after the fall of the Jerusalem church, not only with how the Gnostics draft them in, but also how the Roman church would have been viewing them. But the Roman church at times kind of viewed them more adversarial and didn't want to recognize their legitimacy, or that there would be a succession from James that they would have access to, where the Catholic Church would be more looking for Peter and successors to Peter. I mean, it's kind of a small argument, but understand there's those debates that are going on. And what's interesting about the Book of Jude is it references the Book of Enoch, which is interesting why some people would relate Jude so much with the Book of Enoch, and it's not one of those recognized even in the old KJV Apocrypha. But many church fathers did quote from the Book of Enoch, so maybe that had something to do with it. It also quotes, and that's in Jude 122 to 123, where it references a passage out of the Book of Enoch. And it also references with the encounter of Moses and the devil at Moses' death, the testament of Moses, in verse 14 and 15. So it's interesting with those kinds of connections. And Saint Jude in the Bible, which is a different Jude, but again, just sort of laying together some of the affiliations here, is the patron saint of lost causes. And Jude goes back to the Hebrew word 3063, which is Yehuda, or Judah, and the southern kingdom and one of the southern tribes. So again, another sort of interesting relationship that not necessarily would be looked upon by the Catholic Church as a doctrine that they would be falling on. And then you have some doctrines of the Catholic Church that I think does apply and why they have it in. So there's, in terms of the Catholic understanding, the Book of Jude helps Christians to understand the plight of and the dogma being talked about, and the challenges of both the plight and the doctrine of the Jerusalem church in the early days of Jerusalem, as they're trying to sort out all of the recollections of Jesus, everything that was said, what is said by the disciples, what is gospel given and reminded to the disciples and apostles to write the scripture. So all of that's sort of at play. And in this, you would enter in the book of Jude. And I think there's two main doctrines in there in Jude, and it rings of things that they underline continually in the Catholic Church. One is sort of the spirit of the law and the spirit of faith and the spirit of God. But it's that spirit of faith that you get as you have the spirit in you to want to lead you to uphold the law, even though we're freed of the law. But it's the spirit of the faith and to hold on to that faith above all things and never compromise on the faith. And then it's also talking about works in the book of Jude. But the book of Jude really underlines the value of faith. But it's also, from a Catholic view, that it's, if you have that faith, if you have that spirit in you, you will do works to influence the world. And they put a lot of emphasis on works in the Catholic Church, and they tend to, I think they tend to use Hebrew in support of that, along with a few other books. But we're talking about the book of Hebrews there, and that in that act of doing good works, to always act in love and in mercy, which is at the heart of the book of Jude. One other interesting thing about the book of Jude is I think it sort of relates to the Catholic Church, and it's fit in end time prophecy. References that are interesting when it talks about the false prophets and false prophets, who set themselves above the law, or false prophets as their reference in terms of angels in the book of Jude, connection there to Sodom and Gomorrah, and a connection to Cain and to Korah's rebellion. And I think all of that is that if we're looking at an organized sort of religion, beware of the false prophets and the ones that want to change the church. And the Roman Church is, I think, positioning itself to try and be the spiritual organization for the New World Order that's coming. It's going to be the Babylons, the Templar Dream, and we have a Jesuit in there today. But again, that's more for the end time than what's the connection, between the Book of Jude and the Catholic Church. But I think from a doctrine perspective and what they continue to push in the services in the Catholic Church is faith and doing good works. I think that's the importance there, but I may have misunderstood the question too.
No, great answer, and I agree with the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, positioning itself on purpose. They, like you said, they have the first Jesuit admitted. It's in the position of Pope, and it's in prophecy, that's for sure. About the false prophet, the end time one world religion. I mean, it all kind of ties together in my eyes anyway. The next question we have is from one of our moderators in the chat, from Tammy George. She asks, what are your thoughts about Jesus being made up by Satanists? Like we are supposed to worship the Father only.
Yeah, the Satanists, the polytheists, even seculars, because they're all sort of working from the same puppet masters. They are always trying to see doubt in Christianity, and they want to lead people away. And the people who represent the Satanists and interact with Christians, we don't give enough credit to them in terms of how much they know about the Bible and how well they've been prepared with set arguments to create those wedges and doubt. So this is one of like 1,000 things that they do. And that when they look at saying that Jesus told us to pray to our Father, that is absolutely correct. But that is a far jump to say that Jesus was made up by Satanists, and that he's, and therefore the New Testament is all false. Well, that's the doctrine of Babylon. That's the doctrine of the Antichrist. That's the spirit of the Antichrist. And it's always to deny Christ, and it's always to deny God and to slander them and to lead people away from God. So here's what I would say to answer that, not knowing, because again, there's about 5 or 6 different lanes that they'll take this argument in. And so who is Jesus? Well, Jesus is the Word of God, as is talked about in the book of John, and as his name is written on his belt in the book of Revelation. So what's the Word of God? That is the logos of theos, logos being word and God, it being theos. And so it's a cognate term for Jehovah of the Elohim in the Old Testament. And if we understand that, they can't trip us up on these things that they're going to say to devalue Jesus, or Jesus is the son of Lucifer, or the 1,000 different lanes that they're going to go down on it. So how do we know that this is the same sort of understanding and the same cognate term? Well, the Old Testament kind of tells us this, and then we connect it to the New Testament, which sort of tells us that as well. So, like in Psalms 100, verses 2 to 3, it says, Lord is God. That's Jehovah is Elohim. And in Psalms 95:6, it says, worship the Lord, our creator, our maker. The Word is the creator. The Word is the one who creates all things in John 1 and in Colossians 1, including the angels, including Satan. Right. And he sits above that sort of hierarchy. And so that's, Jehovah that's being talked about here. The Lord is our maker, our creator. When God spoke to create things, including people of day 6 and the Adamites, it's Jehovah that's involved. We see Lord God in Genesis 2, Jehovah of the Elohim. We get just Elohim when God speaks, but all 3 are there. So we see when God speaks, that's the Hebrew word Amar. That's the word. So when God wants something done, he has the word do it. And the word became flesh. And he only says what the Father tells him to say and permits him to say.
Right.
We need to understand that. So when he's praying to his Father, that's El Elyon, or the singular sense to Elohim as it's used in Genesis 1. So when you see Elohim in the uppercase, you need to know the context that's being used there as to, is it all 3 or is it 1? And it's singular there by reference because we have Amar for when God speaks, the word. And in Genesis 1:2, at the beginning of the renewal of the earth, you have the Spirit of God floating above sort of the chaos. Well, that's the Ruach of the Elohim. Mm-hmm. So the 3 is Jehovah of the Elohim, which becomes flesh and becomes Jesus. And you have the Spirit of the Elohim, and you have El Elyon of the Elohim. That's the 3. And that the Word of God is the branch of God that he's talking about. So he's an extension as the Word. The Spirit is God's Spirit as an extension. So they're part of one, but they're distinct because they were created for sort of a specific kind of reason. And that when we look at, the Spirit of God application, we see applications in the New Testament, like in Romans 15:19, where you have the Spirit of the God, which is pneumos of theos. And there are other passages. You have the Spirit of God in the Old Testament, which is Ruach of Elohim. And as it's being used in Exodus 31, this is the Spirit of God in wisdom, which is Chakma, which is the female version of it, and the action of the Spirit of God is with wisdom. So it's the application that I think is being talked about there. And although some people would translate that as a female version, but it's a spirit. So I would lean more towards the application there. But that's just my opinion. You have other passages where the Spirit of God is being used, and it's the exact same words. And then you have Jehovah used without Elohim to denote that this is an individual one. And it's Jehovah is the one that is doing all of the interaction for the most part with us through the Old Testament. So if we sort of understand that it starts to make sense, and people can't fool us with their very specious types of questions and intent. So let's say in Exodus 6:7, you could also use 8:29. You could use probably 100 other ones in the Old Testament where it says, "The Lord your God," that is Jehovah Elohim. Mm-hmm. And so we see how that works. So, and Jesus is the reflection of God. He is God with us. He is the voice of God. And all the terms work in harmony for this extension out of El Elyon. And so don't let people fool you on that. And so much so that I would also go back to Hebrews and just underline it with that the angels are to worship Jesus. Mm. Right? And then Matthew 4, when Jesus and the devil, Satan, Diablos, are working together, or not working together, but when they're in the desert, Jesus commands Satan to worship the Lord your God.
Yes.
So that is him and God. And we should understand it that way. And he's doing it with the authority of the Elohim. And, you could look at it saying, in that translation that you should worship Jesus, but I think Jesus wouldn't do that. He would always put the proper respect in for El Elyon, just the way he speaks in everything that he does. So don't let them tell you, well, if Jesus is God, who is he praying to? Well, he's the branch of God, and he was made flesh. And understand the distinctions. Once you get the distinctions and the cognate terms in each of the two testaments, they can't drive a wedge there.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for that, Gary. That's that question seems to come up quite a bit for those of us who are heavily involved in social media, where people will ask these kinds of questions. And that was such a great way to answer these people who are trying to say that Christ is actually Satan. They're just to know, to have that outline in your mind of how to answer that, because it's kind of shocking when somebody will just come out and say that. You need to have an answer.
There's another interesting passage that's in Isaiah 14 where it says Lucifer, son of the morning. And some people will say son of the morning is the morning star Venus, where you get the Italian word Lucifer coming through Lux and Venus and words similar to that. Right. So that is actually Halel ben Shakar. Halel, a shining one and a boastful one, in the dual meanings of the words as you take that back to the Hebrew, and more detail than that, but that's the guts of it. And the son of the morning. And they say that Lucifer is the morning star. Well, it doesn't say that. It says he's the son of the morning. And he's part of the morning star order. It's part of his traits, just as he's part cherubim and he's part other angels as well. And that Jesus is the morning star. Mm-hmm. And Jesus, as in Colossians 1 and John 1, who creates all things, including the angels, and the angels are created in Psalms 104, as we get that accounting of it, he would be the son of Jesus as a son of God. He may have been the most powerful, unique angel, but he was still created by Jesus. So don't let them twist those verses.
Right. And then in other extra biblical books, like I don't know if you've heard of the Revelation of the Magi. It was recently translated to English and maybe about 10, 12 years ago. And it's a Syriac writing. It was from the Vatican, basically translated from Latin into English, and it clearly says how Jesus was the actual star. Like that was the main focal point of the entire book, and a lot of interesting references to that. So that really, and we know Satan loves to copy, so of course he wants to call himself the morning star and try to make it a little gray blurred there in the Bible. But when you go back to original language and how you just broke it down about Hillel, there's no questions, right? Okay, what time is it now? Okay, we have time for one more question, I believe, before break. I think we have about 7 minutes. This is from Paul's Pods. Explain how the disasters and events in Revelation are, and this is in quotes, contrived.
So when I use the word contrived, I mean it's not coming from God. It may be being permitted by God, but it's not God trying to hurt people or hurt the world. And so when I say contrived, it is something that has been created by the people running this earth, the visible and the invisible ones, to achieve their agenda and to bring about this rendezvous with destiny, this showdown with God in the end time. So when we look at the disasters of the book of Revelation, we're basically talking about the sorrows that are recorded in Jesus's template. And because the book of Revelation is the testimony of Jesus given to the angel to show John, it's going to fit perfectly with Mark 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and Luke 21. Just has to be, otherwise it's not going to be the word of God. And so when we look at the contrived events on disasters versus other ones, because he includes other signs and major signs for people, but the four that are listed are earthquakes, pestilence, wars, and famine. So earthquakes, they show up in Revelation 6, 12, 8, 16, 8, in Revelation 11, 13, and also, as I said, Revelation 16. So you have earthquakes showing up in the seals, you have earthquakes showing up in the trumpets, and you have earthquakes showing up in the wrath, bowls of wrath, and they're all getting stronger as the sorrows get stronger. So seals are 25%, trumps are 33%. It would be 100% destruction, but Jesus steps in so that all flesh isn't destroyed and the whole earth isn't destroyed by fire. So earthquakes, that's the most challenging sort of aspect to being contrived. And that's why I start with the earthquakes. But what we do know is earthquakes are getting stronger and that they work in conjunction with severe earthquakes, and severe damage would be the start of pestilence because of the consequences, and also famine. So these contrived catastrophes that are brought on by the world to drive us into world government, to drive us into the universal religion, to make the way for Antichrist, are designed to create that. And the false prophets will come along and predict those catastrophes to move us that way. And they can predict them not because they're supernatural, because they're contrived. So when we understand that we're getting closer into the days of Noah that Jesus talks about, and that they had the technology to destroy the world, they had angelic technology passed on to them, they would have probably had technology that would cause changes in weather. And just as you have also fallen angels who control the weather, they control it either way. And I have an interesting little link on Brennan talking, I think, about 2019. He was a former member of the CIA. And that they could control the weather, and they had to be discerning on how they were going to apply it, because it could cause all sorts of damage and unrest around the world with other leaders. So They have the ability to do technology that they're not completely showing us, and it's in it, and that's what's so powerful about that Brennan tape. And it's not, and he's at the Council of Foreign Relations when he's giving the information in the speech. So,
Oh, wow.
I mean, yeah. So,
ironic.
anyways, I kind of digress on that, but so pestilence, we've seen how that can be created, and started with the last pestilence. Expect more of that.
Yes.
Wars and rumors of wars. That's all caused by the people who run this world, and they're going to need to do that to bring about the geopolitical network, to set up the 10 kings and to create the scenario for Babylon and Antichrist. And then famine is just is a consequence of those things, and or bad weather, which we were just talking about. So again, you have pestilence that's talked about in Revelation 6, Revelation 8, Revelation 16. You have wars that are talked about in Revelation 6, Revelation 9, and Revelation 16. You have famine in Revelation 6, Revelation 8, and 16. And so all of this is related to the sorrows that are going to get stronger. But it's not God's judgment. He's just permitting it to happen. And how does this happen? Because the beast empire is permitted to come along and do this, and then Antichrist is permitted to come because the holy restrainer is either removed or Michael sits down, or both on that, and being one of the same is another possibility, to let Antichrist come to power. But if we understand now the four horses, which are the four winds of prophecy, as I talk about in book 2, and show you how I get there, and the same beings that come from the presence of the Lord in Zechariah 6, they're bringing all of these things to continually happen on the earth. And these are also the four winds of the beast empires that permit them to rise, just as the four winds blow on the sea for these Gentile empires to come up out of the sea in Daniel 7. So it's all working interchangeably. And even with the wrath bowls, I don't think that's by definition the wrath of God. That is what God is still permitting to have happen, and the consequences of the actions. And I think that Mark of the Beast is probably an issue with the technology that they are implementing, and why people get the sores and things there. But it's the day of the Lord, which is the wrath of God. And that comes in the year of the Lord's wrath and culminates with the day of the Lord's wrath with Armageddon. So that's kind of how I get there.
Thank you so much, Gary. We are at break, and we will see you on the other side.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
We will not comply with the institution's sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply with the institution's sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. They're trying to dumb us down. Don't want us to make a sound. We gotta get out of now, 'cause it's a revolution.
Revolution.radio, freedomslips.com.
Welcome to Coffee Rants with Dan. I am the spiritual anarchist, Dan Arnold, your host. Tune in for what's really happening every Thursday. That's Thursday at 9 a.m. in Studio A on Revolution Radio. They keep us in fear to manipulate us. They want us ignorant so we're easier to enslave. They make us murder one another so they don't have to do it themselves. Only you can break their mind control by healing the contradictions within your belief systems that allow you to accept their lies in the first place. The time has come for us to remember our divinity, who we really are, to return to what we are meant to be, a service to others, to return to nature, and to reclaim our birthright, that which is freedom. The truth will sound belligerent because it is in direct opposition to lies. So get angry, because anger is sacred, and together we can unite and rise. Rise from this darkness. Humanity, assemble.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're in the middle of another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher, speaker, and author Gary Wayne. He's answered quite a few questions already during the first hour, and we do have we have 5 questions left. They were submitted by someone who is also in the chat, and he's also one of the moderators for the Facebook page that is attributed to Gary's work. And it's Daniel Sullivan. So we're looking forward to hearing all of his questions. Gary, are you there, brother?
I am.
Okay, great. And also reminder, I put in the chat also for questions for next month's AMA, please put them in all caps in the chat so we can see them. My niece is in there and she's taking down the questions for me. So we appreciate all your help. Thank you, moderators, for always putting up links and where you can find Gary's work. Gary, did you want to repeat that real quick of where people can buy your books?
Yeah, so the best and easiest and quickest way to buy my books is through my website. And on that website, there is a buy now page for both book 1 and book 2. So if you want to get a signed copy, click on the buy now. And if you want a signed copy, I have 3 pages on each of the book 1 pages and book 2 pages. And that's because I live in Canada, so I ship out of Canada. So if you're in the US, you click on the US page. If you live in Canada, you click on the Canadian page. And if you live anywhere else in the world, you click on the international page. And if you want to link over and buy from barnesandnoble.com or amazon.ca or amazon.com, I have links on that buy page to go directly to where you would order from those companies. And I also have links for the Kindle version on Amazon for both books on that website. And I will also, hopefully before Christmas, we'll have the Audible links up there as well for both book 1 and book 2. And book 2 will be out on Audible in the next month. And just waiting, I have to just do the final approvals on the sound that has been completed. So it's moving along nicely. And it's also available on other online bookstores as well, and on some stores. So it's distributed so they can by book distributors. So if you wanted to order it in, they could certainly order it in because it's distributed by the largest book distributor out of Pennsylvania. So
awesome. All right. Well, I also wanted to comment. Did you get a chance to finish whatever? I'm sorry, the break came so fast. I didn't want to cut you off. Did you have any other things you wanted to add to answer Paul's question about the disasters in Earth in Revelation that Contrived?
Yeah, I would sort of sum it up. I covered off most of the details that I wanted to do, but I would sort of sum it up that God lets everything play out through our free choice and angelic free choice and demigod or giant free choice. And so he's not the one who causes these things. It's not his way, but through free choice with first the rebellion of the fallen angels, and then with the creation of Adam and Eve and their rebellion by not following the only law that was provided to them in Eden, and with the demigod giants being created and all the things that have transpired on the earth is because of our free choice to try and be separate and away from God. And that if we had chosen God, then these things would not be happening. But God's Alpha Omega, so he knows everything that's going to happen. And he only intercedes, as with the flood, to either permit it or bring it so that the world's not destroyed by fire, because that's reserved, according to 2 Peter 3, for the end time, as we understand the destruction of these catastrophes will do. So this is all being done through free choice on the earth, and it convicts both humans, angelics, and the hybrids in between by their choices and what they do. And we would all fall short because we're all sinful, but our choice to choose Jesus gives us an exception to the sins. And that is why I think we should understand that the God of the Bible doesn't bring about these types of horrible things.
Yes,
to innocent people. So
I agree. And I was going to comment too that Satan, he's just so subtle. Like 10 years ago when I was talking to people about weather modification, I got these deer in the headlight looks and just like I'm nuts. And then now it's kind of more accepted. It's kind of even gone more mainstream media. You can even find like videos of the rainmakers they have out there. And we've seen it so obvious in some of the most recent catastrophes that have been around the world that there's no way that, some of these would happen, like a hurricane in the mountains. Like that's just some of the things they do. I mean, they're making it more and more obvious, I guess I'm trying to say. But we can move on to the next question here from Daniel Sullivan. He asks, who are the kings of the earth the great men, rich men, chief captains, and mighty men of Revelation 6. Is this Babylon blaming their own wrath on the Lamb?
Yeah, two interesting questions there. So Revelation is showing in great detail to show the upper sort of two classes that they will interconnect with Babylon, who controls the seventh empire and the 10 kings. But this is showing in Revelation 6 the kings, the great men, the rich men, the chief captains, and the mighty men, and the bondmen, and every free man. It's showing basically the four classes that have been in place all throughout our history, and that it's the descendants of the giants who are running this upper class. So if we look at, the great men, and I'll start with the great men and sort of work a little bit back so that people get an understanding of understanding cognate terms in Greek that are translated in English to words in the Old Testament out of Hebrew is important to nail these cognate terms because they're in two different languages. And if it was all in Hebrew, it would be easier. So we would just have to, take the Hebrew words out of the Old Testament, and that's going to have the same sort of application. So in this case, you have great men, and I'll start there. And great and mighty men is, the term for, as we understand, the giants. And you have terms like Gibor and Gibori and Atzum, that same for describing and there's a few other ones that are in there as well, like Az and Azaz, but they're all talking about giant descriptions in those words in the Old Testament. So great men, the term great is inserted. Men is the word that we're interested in here. And that is the megastranes out of Greek. And megastranes is a very important word, and it means, as it's translated, it said, great men, but it's rooted in grandes, which means, and it comes from megistos, and it means very great and the greatest of men, but the 3175 megastranes means lords, nobles, chiefs, and leaders. So these great men are at the upper echelon of the nobility, the rich men and the chief captains. They're important as well as you get into and into the mighty men. These are again the upper class. So like the mighty men is going to be dunatos, which is the root word for dunamis, or an extension of dunamis, which is a mighty angel. So again, they're all talking about similar terms. And then you get into the bondman and the free man of the people of the earth. Now, what's important about megastranes is that you also have the kings of the earth as the great men. And when we look at that term great men as it's used in Revelation 19:18 for great men, that's the Greek word mega. And mega means great as in stature, as in age, as in height, and words like that. And again, it's rooted in another word, megas, that is basically of the same meaning. And what's interesting is those words go back to an Indo-Aryan word named Meg, or spelled Meg, M-E-G, which is the language of the Nephilim, as the source word for mega and megastranes into Greek, and it means large, vast, tall, big, and mighty. And so as we get those words coming down through the languages, it's carrying with it the history in the etymology, and that these large men, mega, as we would understand mega in the Webster's dictionary, means large, huge, chief, weighty, and bloodline descendant, as it takes it back to the etymology. So this is very important word, and in Indo-Aryan Meg is large, vast, tall, big, and mighty. So again, you see these terms that are being used, and it's all for these bloodlines. And so when we look at the word king, that's basically the Greek word basileus, as in to rule. And that's important to remember its definition. And when we look at the word royal, that means kings of God. Roy, as it comes out of Old French, and al as a transliteration for el, as in an angel or a god, or kings of God, and similar term to Rex Deus, kings of God. And as you take that word king, Roy, back to Latin, it's reg, G-R-E-G, and regalis and regal. All those words come out of it. And it's transliterated as well as rex, coming out of Latin. And so rex as in king, it comes from an Indo-Aryan word, of course, out of Latin. And it means basically to rule. And it's the Indo-Aryan word. It's basically an H with an apostrophe, regs, and it's to rule. So it's the same meaning as a king, and it's all related to the great and the mighty men of the Old Testament who usurped all of the kingships. So as we look at the understanding of the words in Revelation 6, we also know that royal is used in the Old Testament into Hebrew. And so you have a word for royal, and it's Melkuth, that comes from Malak, meaning king, as the source word. So again, we have a connection of royal going back to kings. And understand when I use that word al, understand Baal is the transliteration of el at the end and means Lord God, which is why they like to say Lord God in Freemasonry is Baal, as it should be translated in the King James Version Bible. That's their manipulation on it. Wow. So again, and when we look at that word Malek, that's associated and with the same sort of spelling as what you have for an angel, because these are the offspring of the fallen angels, and they received the divine right to rule in that bloodline. So as we look at that word giant and gigantic, that goes back to Gygus as the root word for giant, and its plural is Gaies, because it's spelled G-I-Y-G-E-S, but with the E, it makes the G into a Y. So when we see like the Herculides bloodlines, that goes back to Zeus and Alcmene, or the Credigens, then we would understand Gog is coming from that bloodline, Gog of Magog, and from the race of the Gyges, and that this is a bloodline again of the giants. And that the transliteration coming into gigantic doesn't come from Gygus. Gygus is the root word for giant. Gigantic, as it comes down into English, that would be pronounced gigantic if you were using the singular form, which is Gigantes in Greek, as we transliterate that. But the plural is Gigents, and it's pronounced giantes. So we're getting the plural version being transliterated into English for giantes and shortened to giant, which is rooted in Gygus. So, and that means exactly that. It's a giant far above the size of the natural size of that species, as you take that back to its meaning. So when we're looking at this group of people here at the end time, they're equated with the mighty ones that are shown in the Gog War before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And this is, I think, in Revelation 6 is a different war than the trumpet war of Revelation 9, that these mighty men that are being talked about in Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is Gibborim, which is a word used to describe giants and giant kings, and these are all the bulls of Bashan. Bull is one of the definitions of Nephilim as being a giant and or the god. So when you see the bulls of Bashan in the book of the Psalms mocking Jesus on the cross, that's both the demonic spirit and the fallen angelic spirits that are mocking Jesus on the cross. So you also get the mighty ones in Joel 1 and 2. And again, these are the mighty ones who became the kings. And now we can start to say that these are the same cognate terms in Greek as they are for the Hebrew. So the other part of the question that Daniel is answering is this blaming Babylon, or is this Babylon blaming their own wrath on the Lamb? This is an understanding that I think that they are confusing this time with the wrath of the Lamb. And the wrath of the Lamb is an equivalent term for, the day of the Lord's wrath, or the year of the Lord's wrath. That's going to happen, about 7 years later, or just under 7 years. And so they think that this destruction, which is 25% destruction of the population, of the whole earth, of all the waters, of all the grass, of all the trees, of all of the people, is the day of the Lord's wrath. And so they're fleeing into their underground fortresses, cities, bunkers, maybe all of the above, because they think it's the day of the wrath, but it is still yet to come. You still have the trumpet destruction of 33%, and then the year of the Lord's wrath at the end. So are they blaming this on the Lamb? I'm not sure that I would go quite that far, but they are thinking, because it's so bad, that this is the wrath of God.
Wow. And it's so ironic as you're sharing all of this. This is the exact area I'm at in your book, in the chapter, The King of Jerusalem title, which explains that entire thing about the divine right to rule asserted by royals. And then I'm trying to find somewhere else a little earlier, you mentioned how it's kind of seen as the kings and rulers of earth are kind of like an avatar for the fallen angels, as like their offspring, like they're descendants of the giants from even before the flood, and of course after the flood too.
Yeah, they would look for power from their gods, and they would accept an avatar in, and they would accept demons in as well if they think that they could provide additional, as in a trickster spirit of the demons, or the clown spirit and shaman spirit, where they're trying to receive additional knowledge and stuff.
Wow. There's so many different rabbit trails you can go down there, and it's causing
Yes,
me to
there
want
are.
to research. No, your work has caused me to want to research who are the kings and rulers of the earth, because they're not very public, especially here in the US and Canada. We don't really, they're not like they would be in Europe, where everyone knows who their king and queen is of their country. And we're kind of like, unless you actively look for it, they're not public, like online, unless you go and look for the royals of Europe, or who are the royal families. And it's opened my eyes to quite a bit of how they could be, similar to like how Ronald Reagan was an actor. It would make sense that quite a few of the royals, having huge egos of the Nephilim, would want to be in the public eye so that they can receive the worship that they feel are due to them. That's kind of my take on it.
Oh, absolutely. That's all part of it. Yep, no doubt about it, in my mind.
Yeah, and then they own the media as well. So why not make themselves the stars of all the things the media puts out there, right?
Exactly.
Okay, all right. So next question from Daniel. In the days of the seventh trumpet depicted in Revelation 11, verse 18, are wrath and judgment coming, or have wrath and judgment already come?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would go back to Revelation 10 first, 10:7. And it's an important passage, because when Daniel is talking about the days of the seventh trumpet, that's where it's talked about. And it's after the voice of the seven thunders and whatever comes with them that can't be written down, which is going to be awful. This is after the midpoint of the last 7 years. But it says, in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, and he hath declared his servants the prophets, that he had declared to his servants the prophets. So in there you're getting the days, so it could be years or multiple days, as you would define that, of the seventh angel and the seventh trumpet. When it's about to sound, there's going to be some more significant events that are going to happen, and that days of the trumpet that overlaps from Revelation 10 through 11 through 12 through 13 and to about 14:8 or so in Revelation 14. That includes the information of the major details of the first 3.5 years. So it's important to understand that. And also you get something that I like to call prophecy markers that you need to be aware of that will help, and particularly as you're again sort of connecting to the end time as well, so that you can see that they're using similar sort of terms and things. So when you hear the word trumpet, if it's in the Old Testament and the trumpet is sounded and it is in a book of the prophets and that it's talking about the end time, that's a marker, that's a time marker. And you should start, and you will, once you start to see how it fits in, you'll start to say, hey, that's telling me that this is in the timing of somewhere between the first and the seventh trumpet. And we're talking about the seventh trumpet. And the mystery of God is another one that fits more through into some of Paul's writings, but again, it's a marker. So you want to keep that in mind as a reference. So as we get into 11:18, and where it's talking about the wrath and the judgment, and I'll just read it so that we're clear on what it's talking about here. It says, and the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come. And I'm going to come back to that. And the time of the dead that should be judged, and that thou should give reward unto thy servants the prophet, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. So again, we've got some terms in there like prophets and saints, and the time of the wrath, and that the nations are angry. And again, these are all important words that give us important sort of timing. So that word come is I think an important word there, and it's the Greek word erkomai. I always have trouble with that. Erkom-ahi, to come or to appear or to come into being or to follow. And again, it's to try and understand the proper translation. So I think in sort of the syntax and the spelling of the words, where the wrath that is come, it's to come or will appear or to follow would be a better understanding. But this is Baconian English, so that could be what they were trying to convey as opposed to how we understand it at this time. So this is after the death of the two witnesses, after their 3.5-year commission in Jerusalem, where now Jerusalem is going to become Sodom and Gomorrah, basically Antichrist city, when he is crowned at the abomination at the midpoint of the last 7 years. So what have we seen by this point at the midpoint? We've seen the horrific wars and catastrophes of the seal judgments, and we've seen what we would understand as World War III, for lack of a better word, in Ezekiel 38, 39, Joel 1 and 2, and Revelation 9. And this is the false Armageddon war that Antichrist will use as part of his mythos and pedigree to claim himself to be the true Messiah, and that was the Armageddon battle, and it's going to destroy 33% of the world. So when you see how the nations were angry and Antichrist is coming, he's already here at that sort of point in time, and he's already been involved with the destruction of the two witnesses. And Antichrist is the one who is called, who comes up out of the abyss, the one who was, now is not, but will be again, who comes up out of the abyss, just as the one who comes up out of the abyss kills the two witnesses. So again, we get sort of a timing here, and a timing of the abomination. And so as we start to funnel that into it, this is the time of Jesus' coming. It's in the same sort of period, in the days when the mystery is going to be completely fulfilled, in the beginning of the last 3.5 years. So Babylon is destroyed in Revelation 14:9 after the last of the gospel is preached and after the first fruits are shown. And Matthew 24:4 is the preaching of the gospel. That's going to include the 144,000, the two witnesses, and the final angel. And then the end comes. And the end is the last 3.5 years and the time of the great tribulation, not seen since the beginning of the creation of the earth, as is talked about in Mark 13:19 as affliction and as tribulation in Matthew 24:21. And this is the same time as the time of Jacob's trouble, which is in Jeremiah 37 that Israel is going to be saved out of. And tribulation is part of the definition, affliction, persecution. It's a cognate word, sarah, for thlipses, for tribulation and affliction that are used at that timing, at the time just after the abomination, after Antichrist kills the two prophets, and Antichrist is slated to rule for 3.5 years, as Revelation 13 talks about. So now when we look at Daniel 12, which is again at the midpoint, this is the time that Michael rises, stands up, and that this is the time of resurrection of Israel and their judgment, some to everlasting life and some to the second death, and is sort of the summary understanding of the detail that's provided as the conclusion of the second Exodus that Jeremiah 37 talks about. And second Exodus is also talked about in Ezekiel 39 after the Gog War, so a second half likely event. And you have Ezekiel 37 that's going to talk about this resurrection, the judgment, and the uniting of Israel back with Judah with the second Exodus. So as we're putting sort of all of that together, it starts to make sense that this is the Great Tribulation judgment that's going to culminate with the year of the Lord's favor, which finishes off the second Exodus and also announces the year of the Lord's wrath, which culminates with the Armageddon battle. So this is the timing of Jesus' coming and the resurrection sequence that's going to include that judgment and resurrection in Ezekiel 37, but after the rapture. And so when we look at the seventh trumpet that's being talked about here and the wrath and judgment that is going to be coming, the wrath and the judgment hasn't come yet. And where people will get confused is the time of the dead, that they'll be judged. That is referencing to the dead that are judged. The only dead that are judged before the second resurrection at the end of Revelation are those in Ezekiel 37. The other resurrection sequence are the Christ, the first fruits, and then when he comes, those who died in Christ, who aren't going to be technically judged. I mean, we're all judged, but they're free of that judgment through their faith, and they're being resurrected. So you could say they're being judged, but not with punishment, but just everybody has to go through the judgment. And then those who are still alive are transformed. And then you have, the other resurrections that are going to happen that are going to include the people in the last 3.5 years who aren't going to take the mark of the beast or worship Satan, and their heads are beheaded. They're going to be resurrected to rule with Jesus in the millennium. So, no, the simple answer is the wrath and the judgment hasn't come. We just have to understand the details of the resurrection sequence.
Great, Gary. Thank you so much. That clears up a lot, because it's kind of a topic that's kind of popular on social media to say that, the rapture's come already, we're in the little season or whatever. But with all the details that you gave and all the evidence, there's no way that could be true in my mind anyway. Okay, next question from Daniel. Would you please rehash your teaching on the root of Jesse prophecy, as that segment was cut short last time?
I think that was a couple of shows ago, but yeah, we can certainly talk about this, because again, it goes to different details of the chronology that's important to kind of understand. And there are many prophecy, what I call narratives, that go to the rapture timing and time chronology. So what I try and do is I try and separate them into those certain sort of narratives, like the year of the Lord favor, or a second Exodus, or Armageddon, or the year of the Lord's wrath. And even within the rapture, you've got certain narratives that it's talking about, like the thief of the night. How does that all fit in? And so this is kind of one of those kind of narratives. And once you get the template down, I think, and using Jesus's chronology, then things just sort of fit, because you take all the conflicts away, which you should expect. So it's just a matter of, and as I was going through this process, that if I wanted to, I had a passage that I was struggling with. Once I got into the idea that what are the other narratives here that's talking about that set of events, and how does that fit into that? Because I already know how the larger narrative fits into, how the smaller narrative fits into the larger narrative. It just sort of helped me go from point A to B and then to C with it. So let's have a look at Romans 15 in conjunction with Romans 11 and Isaiah 11 and a few other passages. And this is a big topic, and I'll try and keep it as short as possible, but it has a lot of very valuable kind of information there that is important to understand. So I'm going to start with Romans 15:8, and the reason why I'm going to start with 15:8 is that it says that Jesus was the minister of circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises that were made. And so it's the circumcision covenant, and it's relating to both Israel and the new covenant. And he's the minister of that circumcision, which is just amazing words, but I don't want to spend too much time on that, but it's just important to understand that. And then in verse 9, it's talking about, and understand that when this is going to be confirmed, not only the circumcision covenant, but the holy covenant is to be confirmed with Jesus as the minister. So both old and to new. And, confirm all the provinces that God provided to Israel and Jesus provided to Israel in the Old Testament. So it's an important premise that they lay down. And in verse 12, it's talking about Isaiah. So now we know it has an Old Testament application that we need to fold into the understanding. And with Isaiah, it's referencing a passage that's quite famous, where there will be a root from Jesse, and that he shall rise to reign over the Gentiles, and in him and the Gentiles will trust in him. And so this is a very important passage as to what's being sort of talked about here in terms of Romans 15. And I would also include Romans 11 for some context, where the Gentiles have come in into the covenant, and it's done with the temporary blindness and hardening of the heart of Israel and in Judah. And that when it's talking about Israel, they are the first fruits. And so if we understand that they are the first fruits of this covenant, as opposed of the resurrection, and they have their own resurrection sequence that happens in the last 3.5 years, as I talked about just a few minutes ago, we need to understand that the deliverer will come to return them to Jesus and the Holy Covenant in the end time. So we're talking about references of Jesus and a connection when there's going to be a root of Jesse that will be a sign and then will reign over the Gentiles, of a timing of what is understood in Hosea 9:7 as the visitations of Jehovah, of the Elohim. So there's certain points when he comes back. So now if we sort of understand that, we can understand in Luke 17, 22, and 26, these are the days of the Son of Man when he comes back, multiple. So the root of Jesse in Isaiah 11 is an end-time prophecy. And in Isaiah 11, it's talking about Jesus will be an ensign and a rallying point for Israel, Judah, and the Gentiles. And that's in verses 10 through 12. And so it's all three. So he's coming more than once to do more than one thing. And that when we look at this word ensign, it's a word that is also translated as standard and banner as well in the Old Testament. These are also markers. And it's going to be an ensign in the sky. Well, if that sounds familiar, if we look at in Matthew 24, Jesus is going to present his sign after the abomination. So the word sign in the New Testament is the equivalent word for Nikos, which is translated as standard, banner, ensign in the Old Testament. And we get another passage that's in Isaiah 18, where there's going to be this, excuse me, just going to clear my voice a little bit here.
No, please
where this is before the harvest in Isaiah 18, when a trumpet blast is blasted, and you're going to have this ensign. And this is the timing of Jesus' coming.
Wow.
And it all starts to make sense. So as the Hebrew word NEC for neck or ness, you also have other passages where we're going to see this being used. And Isaiah 49 is a classic example where it's talking about Lord God, Jehovah of the Elohim, I will lift up my hand to the Gentiles and set my standard, neck, sign, ensign to the people, and they will bring thy sons in their arms, and thy daughters shall be carried on their shoulders. And we get multiple passages on this. And in Isaiah 62, that there's going to be a way prepared for Israel in the second Exodus, where a standard is going to be out there for the people.
Wow.
And we also get a standard on the walls of Babylon in Jeremiah 51 when Babylon is destroyed in the days of the seventh trumpet.
Oh my gosh.
So you see a convergence of these terms and markers and timings with trumpet blasts, because there's trumpet blasts that's associated in some of those prophecies as well. And so it's important to understand how, as I sort of bring that sort of back a little bit to Romans 15, it has a reference to Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, and the root of Jesse. And that's the time of his sign.
Wow.
As it's put in Revelation 11 or Isaiah 11. And then when we look at Matthew 24:30, and we look at all of the tribes are going to mourn when Jesus comes. He's coming for rapture, he's coming for Exodus, and he's coming for Armageddon at the sound of a trumpet, the last trumpet. As I won't go through all of the passages, but when the archangel sounds the trumpet in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, then the mystery of God in 1 Corinthians 15:52, we will not all sleep, but at the last trumpet, we're going to be transformed.
Yes.
Okay, that's the mystery of God at the seventh trumpet. And in Mark 13, it's just perfect. And people will say, well, you can't use Matthew 24:30 to say that that's the rapture. It doesn't say they're going to go to heaven. Well, that's why we have Mark and Luke. They have extra details. And Mark 13:27 says, with the same description of the passage, it adds in to gather his elect to heaven, to the uttermost parts of heaven. You can't take that any more literally or applicable than this is applying to all of the saints that are being resurrected are going to heaven. Right. And it's part of the resurrection sequence. So when we look at how the root of Jesse is tied in, it's tied in for the Gentiles, for Israel, and for Judah. We need to understand that.
Wow. Oh, great teaching, Gary. That was awesome. Let's see what time we have. Okay, we have another question from Daniel. Since the Lamb stands on Mount Zion with the 144,000 before the completion of the gospel in Revelation 14, does that mean his feet touch the ground before the rapture? And is this one of the days of the Son of Man, as in Luke?
So when Jesus is standing on Mount Zion with 144,000, what we're in is Revelation 14. And what's so nice about Revelation 14 is this is giving us the final major details to the first 3.5 years. And then we get a summary after the preaching of the gospel and beginning with the destruction of Babylon, the major events of the last 3.5 years. So we have the 144,000, then we have the preaching of the gospel, and then we have the destruction of Babylon. And so when we look at that, again, we need to reference Hosea 9:7 as the days of Jehovah's visitations, multiple days, multiple times, and Luke 17:22 and 26 for the sons days of the sons of man. And when he's standing on Mount Zion in Revelation 14:1 with 144,000, that word stand or stood is histemi, and it means to stand or to make stand or to establish. And he's doing all of that. I think you can use all of those different meanings there for a larger context, but he's definitely physically standing on Mount Zion. And you could interpret that in heaven or on earth, but I think he's coming, and the 144,000 are going to be there with him, and the 144,000 are kind of martyred by the looks of it, and they're also in heaven. So I think that's the end of the first fruits. So as we look at that passage, this is at a time, again, of the ending of the time of the seventh trumpet, and that continues with the destruction of Babylon at the seventh trumpet. So as we look at that, as in Isaiah 18:7, this is before the harvest, when you have the trumpet and the ensign. And the importance of that is there's also a trumpet blast there. And Revelation 14 also talks about the harvest as the end time war and the angel with the sickle. And then you get the details of that in Revelation 19. So again, the timing of everything fits. And this is the timing of Isaiah 10:11 and the second Exodus. And this is, again, the timing of the trouble that Israel is going to be saved out of in the time of Jacob's trouble. And this is the timing of the root of Jesse when he stands as an insight to the Gentiles. And he's going to show his hands in those passages, and he's going to show his hand to the Gentiles, and that's going to be part of the sign. So yes, I think that is all descriptions of the ensign, sign, standard, banner sort of allegory. And you might see that banner at certain points of time that is going to introduce all of those events.
Wow. That's going to be exciting to be able to see that in the sky, the sign of Christ. That's exciting to think about. And all the other events that are around that, the ensign, that's super cool to think about. Okay, Gary, last question from Daniel Sullivan. We have about 7 minutes left. He asks, is the sheep and goat prophecy about the rapture, the harvest, Armageddon, or the throne judgment?
Yeah, I think you could get that into a prophecy that's talking about the last 7 years, and then as it pertains to Antichrist, the last 3.5 years. So, and I get there starting with, I think Daniel was talking about Daniel 8, where you have the sheep and the goat prophecy of Persia and Greece, and there's going to be a little horn that rises out of that, just as you have a little horn rise amongst the 10 horns that are in Daniel 7, and this precedes Daniel 8. And that the king or the goat is the king of Greece, and out of that arrives 4 notable ones. And so you have the first empire after Alexander dies, where you have the 4 notable ones ruling, and that's 5. Rome is part of that 4, part of Alexander's empire, and that it becomes the 6th empire that is talked about in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. And in the end time, there's going to be a king that rises up, this little horn, in the end time. So he's going to rise up amongst those 10 kings and the 7th empire. And so when it's talking about that little horn in the end time, then when we're really talking about when they take power, that's the first 3.5 years. So in Daniel 8:10, he rises to power. And that's the same timing, because there's going to be a war in heaven there, where he's going to throw down some of the starry host and trample on them after he takes power. We know he takes power with 3.5 years left after the abomination, which is at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And that we have a war in heaven in Revelation 12, where you see the people of Judea fleeing Jerusalem after the abomination to the wilderness, where they're going to wait for lost tribes of Israel who are awakened and the visible Jewish people around the world to be taken in second Exodus to meet them after the abomination. And so you also have in verse 8:24, you're going to have, in 25, you're going to have the holy people killed. So there's going to be a persecution against Israel in their exodus, just as you get those details of this river. That's also talked about as this river in the book of Isaiah during the second Exodus as well. And you're going to have, the last 3.5 years culminating with Armageddon. And that within this time frame, it's identifying in verse 12 that the sacrifice will be taken away, which Antichrist does at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And that this is going to include this whole period of the end time of the little horn is going to include 2,360 days versus 7 years of 22,520 days, which is 30-day months, so about 6.5 years. Understanding that he negotiates the covenant, Antichrist does, as the start of his rise, as he starts to rise of this little horn growing amongst these 10 kings, in Daniel 9:27, with the midpoint of the last 7 years is when he halts the sacrifice and does the abomination. So does it include the rapture in that period? Yes, just after the abomination is, I think, when the rapture is going to take place, and after the destruction and before the destruction of Babylon. So at that midpoint, after the last of the gospel is preached in Revelation 14, and then you get the destruction of Babylon that follows immediately after. That's why we're told to come out of Babylon, and the details of that destruction in Revelation 18. And it's before the harvest, which happens at Armageddon. So again, we're talking about that whole 3.5 year period with that prophecy, and it's giving us timing markers all the way through.
Wow. As I'm getting more into the chapters in your second book about pertaining to the prophecy and just kind of tying everything into what's happening today and what has been prophesied to happen in the future. It's really nice to have you just lay it out there, Gary, because especially I was going to comment too, I really appreciate your chart that compares Revelation 9 with Joel, and it's just those creatures that come out of the abyss. They're almost exact, aren't they? Yeah. They're just like, it's just like a mirror image, and it's nice to have like confirming witnesses. I'd like to have like confirming witnesses in different books that are seeing the same thing in their apocalypse vision or whatever they're seeing there.
I think that there should be confirming passages.
Yes.
And that it doesn't matter. And then what I mean by that is not just like within the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. Of the major events, we should get confirming passages. And there's a lot of detail in the book of Revelation, and it needs to have, of these major events, some cognate passages. Now, we don't necessarily get like the opening of the pit prison in the Old Testament, but we get the war that's a consequence of that.
Right. And on that note, Gary, I hear the music coming on. It's been an awesome show. Thank you, everyone, for participating and submitting questions. And we'll be here same time, same place next month, first Wednesday in December. And thank you again, Gary. Blessings, brother.